You know, this post-Liberation Day, I'm really happy to be talking to you because I think you may be, of all people, able to offer a perspective that I don't yet see. Meaning, I think I do fall into the, oh my God, Trump is the mad king, and now his madness is going to be spilled all over this trade deal. I don't see any redeeming qualities. But there are some cross currents in it, and I feel like you, David Sirota, might be able to point me toward them.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think a lot of things can be true at the same time. I think the Trump tariff policy is, at some level, seems pretty haphazard, seems pretty terrifying if you're worried about higher costs, which I think most of us are. I think it's also true that Donald Trump is the tariff policy is the culmination of a backlash to the free trade orthodoxy that originally really deindustrialized the American heartland and caused mass pain, suffering, and economic devastation across this country.
You mean like NAFTA type, for example?
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm old enough to have worked on Capitol Hill during the passage of the China PNTR deal, which was the original China trade deal that lowered tariffs with China, brought China into the WTO. And at the time back then, this is 1999, 2001, at the time, there were a lot of questions and fears that in doing this, it would, lowering those tariff barriers, it would incentivize corporations to pick up shop and leave the United States to go to places like China to exploit cheaper labor, no environmental standards, no human rights standards, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, for companies to lower their costs and increase their profits by exploiting the authoritarian conditions of China. And there were a lot of concerns about that, by the way, on the left and the right. And in effect, that's essentially what happened. That's what happened over the last 25 years or so. And same thing, companies moving to Mexico, essentially moving out of the United States to exploit exploitable conditions. And I think that if we're being honest about things, we have to understand that caused a ton of pain. It caused a ton of agony, and it reshaped our politics. There was a study recently that found that a core segment of America's working class between the passage of NAFTA and 8 years later, that over those 8 years, a core segment of the working class bailed on the Democratic Party, that some of the strongest Democratic congressional districts became some of the strongest Republican congressional districts because NAFTA was perceived, it was very elevated in the media, perceived to be a Clinton administration Democratic initiative. Now, that's not exactly fair because it was pushed by a Republican Congress, et cetera, et cetera. But the point is that there was a lot of justifiable anger out there. And Donald Trump, who at one point flirted with running under Ross Perot's party line back in the 2000s. Ross Perot was the guy trying to sound the alarm about this. And so my point is only that, yes, it's true that Donald Trump's tariffs don't seem to be all that well thought out. They're not targeted. They're not gradual. They seem to be a power grab by him. They're probably going to destructively exacerbate inflation. But we also have to understand that they're not coming out of nowhere. And that the push for a different trade policy comes out of genuine pain and suffering that the free trade elites in politics foisted on this country with really devastating effects.
That's fascinating. It's more speaking to the origin story of the tariffs as opposed to kind of the situation now. But it also connects so beautifully, David, with what you're talking about, which is working class America feeling jobbed, if you'll pardon the expression, by the trade policies of the past. Yet I look at Trump and I don't see a guy who really cares about working class America, although I understand that he may see them as his constituency that, propelled him to power. Beyond that, I don't think he really cares.
Yeah, I'm not sure he really cares either, I would say this. I do think look, I don't know, put it this way. I don't know what is genuine with Donald Trump, right? I mean, it's hard to psychoanalyze the person Donald Trump. I can say that when he talks about how our existing trade policies have incentivized companies to leave the United States, it has financially rewarded companies that essentially do labor triage, labor arbitrage, environmental arbitrage, et cetera. In other words, exploiting bad conditions in other countries. I do think that rings true. And I do think we should be asking, how do we bring companies and production of things that we really do need to make in this country? How do we bring that back to the United States? Now, I'm not sure across the board tariffs are really the way to do that. And they're going to cause a lot of pain in the short term. I think that there's an argument that a stronger industrial policy is necessary, where the government says in a coordinated fashion, this is we need to be able to make certain things in this country that are vital to national security, things like microchips, et cetera, et cetera. There are ways to incentivize that. There are ways to create the conditions for that don't necessarily involve blunt across the board tariffs. I would also say this, if people are worried about how trade displaces certain jobs or certain manufacturing that moves to other countries, we have not done a good job, as opposed to many other countries. We have not done a good job of supporting workers in transitioning to newer industries. In other countries that are exposed to more global trade than even we are, countries in Scandinavia and the like, provide a real safety net and support system for workers whose jobs are exposed to those trade transitions, right? I mean, put it this way, if you're a worker in Sweden, and you're working in a factory that faces global trade competition, and your job gets outsourced or eliminated, you have a healthcare system that provides good healthcare to you. You have a good retirement system that provides retirement to you. You have a good job retraining program that provides retraining. You have good unemployment benefits and the like. I'm not saying that's a solution, but part of the reason why trade, I think, has exacerbated this political divide in this country is because when workers are sold out by the existing corporate written trade policy, they are left essentially to wither away. There's almost no support system at all. I don't sense any commitment by Donald Trump to create that kind of support system at all. To your point, that's why I'm not sure Donald Trump really does care about the working class. We're watching Donald Trump, and through the supposed Department of Government Efficiency, essentially gut the very frail and already tattered social safety net that exists for workers who are exposed to global trade right now.
Yeah, thank you. That was about to say, the safety net has left the building. I mean, you've got this guy right, going in and just taking a wrecking crew to everything. So even the minuscule support system to which you've referred is really pretty much gone. Let me just, because you mentioned that, segue to that for a second and talk about what is happening in government and, whether or not Trump's vision of a government-less America dovetails a bit maybe with this trade stuff. And here's what I mean. It does fall into an authoritarian, growing dictatorial muscle he seems to want to flex. And I just wonder if, and again, I don't even know that anything with him is so well thought out, maybe instinct with him, but if these things don't just all work toward that goal on some level.
I 100% agree. And I think we have the first Trump administration to look to when it comes to tariffs as well. In the first administration, they put in place something like $550 billion worth of tariffs on certain Chinese goods and the like. And there was a process of getting exemptions corporations, lobbyists could come to the Trump administration and ask for exemptions, special favors, essentially. And there was a study that came out recently that showed a link between companies and lobbyists that represented companies that donated political money to the Republican apparatus and them being preferenced for those exemptions. It was a kind of a smaller version of what we could see happen now, which is the King Trump, if you will, is now in a position vis-a-vis tariffs to offer tariff exemptions to those suitors, companies, lobbyists who come and kiss the ring, right? It is, in that sense, a tool of power consolidation that you've created another situation where if you're a company and you want to make a case that you're going to be put out of business because of the tariffs, you can pony up to the king in hopes of trying to get a special exemption. That's what I'm going to be looking at really closely in the next coming months here. Now, I will say this. Trump has said that these tariffs right now are across the board, right? I mean, so at least for now, superficially, they're not talking about exemptions. But if you really want to watch how this could end up being an authoritarian power grab, it's important to watch what happens coming up. Who's going to get the special favors? Who is going to go kiss the ring? And one more point on this is how Trump gets to use that leverage with different economic and political players to get what he wants.
Oh, that's interesting. Expand on that last part, because that's sort of intriguing. You're saying that he could have agenda items that these various suitors, as you describe them, could take care of.
I mean, for sure. I mean, if you're a company, I mean, think about the media space or something like that. If Trump doesn't want you doing something, if Trump wants a better coverage, if Trump wants for his own family a specific business transaction, and that potential business partner, that entity on the other end is dealing with Trump's tariffs, then Trump's tariffs become a negotiating tool for Trump to get all sorts of things that he wants. And I should mention, part of this is exacerbated, of course, by the fact that Trump is essentially exercising this power unrestrained by Congress, right? I mean, we're in a situation where in the past, there have been situations where Congress had to approve different tariffs. Congress had to say yes or no. Now we're in a situation where the president just gets to wake up one morning, declare Liberation Day, say that there's an across-the-board tariff affecting every American in the entire country, but he also has the power to issue special exemptions to get whatever he wants.
Yeah, it's funny. We were talking today about this because people are championing the Cory Booker record on the Senate floor, which I thought really did punch through and, was a way to, in the minority, seize at least the news cycle on some level. And also the Wisconsin Supreme Court win, which was in the face of all that Musk money. So there's sort of this germination of optimism in the Democrats and also in the left. But it's funny, David, I don't see the seizing of control that you just described, the idea that the executive can, as you said, sort of wake up and impose tariffs, roll back tariffs, scribble out some exemptions, however he wants to do it. That really isn't his area of power. And yet the power has been ceded to him so completely that I find us kind of just rolling over for what are the authoritarian instincts and impulses of this guy. And I ask you, as someone who does know Washington so well, what's happening? Why the complete surrender like this?
Well, look, it's actually a longer story than Donald Trump. I mean, there's the whole idea of the unitary executive theory, which is that this theory that was sort of built in the late 1970s, early 1980s, out of the same. We did a whole podcast series called Master Plan, which is about the rise of this new conservative movement, and they sort of evoked really conjured this idea that the president is singularly the executive branch, that there is no real civil service, that you really can't distinguish between the president and the executive branch, really the president and the government as a whole. And what's happened is that there have been moments in which that doctrine has been enshrined in law. So, I mean, you remember the Bush-Cheney administration citing essentially the unitary executive to do all the sorts of stuff it did in the so-called war on terror. There have been presidents who use emergency powers. My point is we're living through an era where the power, what we once understood as legislative supremacy, that the Congress really drives the policy, the president merely executes the policy, that core fundamental separation of powers situation, that has been significantly eroded to the point where presidents have been more and more operating as elected kings. And I think there's not a good, it's really well understood, well, what is the difference between an elected king and what is supposed to be a president in the United States? And there is a fundamental difference. An elected king, an elected autocrat may get elected, so there may be some small d democracy at work there. There's actually an election we choose. But an elected king, an elected monarch, then has total and complete power. Now, that is not how the country was set up or envisioned. The president is supposed to be a co-equal, the executive branch, a co-equal branch with the Congress. But we look at the Congress today, and it's both, by the way, the Congress's fault and past Congress's ceding power. So it's both the people who are in Congress now, but it's also the power that has been ceded to the executive branch by law now, which has colluded to create this problem where, yes, the president can wake up and do all of these things. And I would say this, it's a really important point here. We lived through an era, and I can't get it out of my head. We lived through an era, the Obama era, where Obama won a giant mandate, had 59 and 60 Senate votes, huge congressional majorities. And there was this argument that the Democrats and the president just couldn't do anything. They didn't have the power to do anything. And this idea resurfaced at times in the Biden administration. Now, I think the Biden administration did a lot better job in a lot of ways on some of these issues than the Obama administration. But you still heard, oh, we can't do anything because of the Senate parliamentarian. Oh, we can't do anything because that would be sort of outside of the norms. Donald Trump should be reminding everybody that those arguments that were made against progressives, the left, rank and file Democrats who wanted their party to do things, that those arguments were nonsense. Donald Trump, I disagree with almost everything Donald Trump has been doing in terms of a power grab, et cetera, et cetera. But it's a reminder that when Democrats are in power, they have had the power to deliver, and they have refused to use that power. We are seeing an exercise of power that exists. And I hope the next time, if there is a next time, that the Democrats have power, everybody will remember that the president has a ton of power. And everybody will not just be satisfied with nonsense like, oh, the president really can't do anything, even if he supposedly wants to. Donald Trump is reminding us of how much power the executive currently has.
Wow, that's such a great point. And I suppose there's this normalcy bias maybe that the Democrats have, that they sort of just want to get back to the parliamentary rules. In this case, certainly you have someone in Trump and those around him that have utter disregard of the rules, disdain for the rules, and even for the law. But their view is, hey, we're going to break it now. We're going to do what we want to do, and then take us to court. We'll see you there, and maybe we'll work it out in 3 or 4 or 5 years, whatever.
I mean, look, that's exactly what they're doing, and I think it's important to remember, Donald Trump's party controls Congress. So when Donald Trump is doing things by executive fiat outside of the separation of powers system, it's important to understand that's a deliberate choice. Let me make it more plain. if Donald Trump wants to do something, he can go to his party in Congress and get Congress to pass a law to do that. But whether it's, eliminating the Department of Education, whether it's whatever he wants to do. In choosing not to do that, I think there's two admissions going on. One, the much more democratic entity of government, right, where there's 435 different elections, where the sort of the people's branch of the government, the Congress, that his agenda, perhaps he fears, cannot gain enough support inside of the most small d democratic entity in the government, which is a reminder that his agenda then is really out of step with what the public actually wants. Because these Congress people have to go back and talk to their constituents and get reelected every 2 years. That's one thing to remember. But the second thing to remember is that when he goes outside of that system, I think they are deliberately trying to create new norms that say that the president can do this. The president doesn't even have to go to Congress. The president is an elected king. And for the long term, I think that's the thing that's among the things that's most scary. Normalizing the idea that the president is not, the executive branch is not a co-equal branch of government, that the courts and the Congress are essentially vestiges of an old system. They are ceremonial at best, and that the president just gets to do whatever they want. And that is, that really is terrifying.
And that really is, it seems, the way it's being played out. You're right. And it's interesting, David, I see this is skipping way ahead in the movie maybe, but I see no way in which this guy is going to step down. Or these people are going to step down. They're really reluctant to give up power. And so I see, I'm refreshed that we even had an election in Wisconsin that seemed to be somewhat legitimate. I believe that, I shouldn't say somewhat, but there's big money in it, which is kind of, to me, always the somewhat. It's just so sad that, we become beholden to this. But I guess what I'm worried about is that this power grab could be complete. And you even, in one of your responses in our conversation so far, have said, if there is, if he does step down, or you said something about, should another election happen, David, I worry that, again, it's skipping way ahead, but I don't know that these guys aren't going to find a way to retain power one way or the other.
Well, I think the most compelling thing that I've seen written is about this idea of competitive autocracy, competitive authoritarianism, where I think our minds are sort of programmed to think, there's a binary. There's like a pure democracy, and then there's like the Third Reich, or like some dictatorial hellscape from a sci-fi movie. I think the world is a little bit more nuanced than that. I think what we're seeing is what we've seen in other countries like Hungary, like El Salvador, et cetera, where there are elections. The elections are competitive, but the incumbents who are in power, the regime, if you will, is able to put its thumb on the scale, use its control of the state to put its thumb on the scale to kind of tilt the playing field in those competitive scenarios. So again, it's not a total, dictatorship, authority, or dystopian dictatorship from a sci-fi movie, but it certainly is a much more authoritarian system than I think we've gotten used to. And we've seen this in countries in Latin America and the like, where there are parts of the systems that are democratic, but where there is real authoritarianism. And I think what that reminds us of is that in order to regain power, or really regain at least a balance of power, it is going to require a constant and mass mobilization and a better awareness that the opposition to this has to be a lot stronger. I always use, when I think about the Democrats, I tend to think of it in terms of the Washington Generals and the Harlem Globetrotters. If your goal is to actually defeat the Harlem Globetrotters, you're not doing anyone any favors by blindly cheering on the Washington Generals, who in many cases are in on the act of losing to the Harlem Globetrotters. If you want to defeat the Harlem Globetrotters, you're probably going to have to demand a much better team than the Washington Generals to challenge the Harlem Globetrotters. The metaphor only goes so far, but I think you get my point.
No, I think it's a really great parallel, actually.
That the Democrats, and to be honest, and people, oh, well, maybe it should be a third party, et cetera, et cetera. The point is, whatever the opposition is, has to be held to a much higher set of standards and demands to actually fight in this kind of situation than what that opposition has been asked of in the past.
So in our last minute or so on that, do you look at what's happened so far with the minority party, the minority opposition, the paid opposition, however you see them in the Washington Generals parallel? Do you see them with any real opportunities, or is this crew just going to roll over and play dead like they have in the past? Do you think, in other words, they can be animated by the sort of rising up in pressure, popular pressure that you're describing?
Well, I can be pessimistic and optimistic all at the same time. I mean, let's use the Cory Booker example. Cory Booker does this filibuster. It's not really a filibuster, but it's something. Gets a lot of media attention. Kind of focuses in some sort of nebulous way that there needs to be a much more vigorous opposition. But if you watch what actually, so that's, I guess that's good. But if you watch what actually happened, literally he says he's ending his speech, and moments later, the Republicans ask if there is unanimous consent to allow the Senate to move forward with considering the confirmation of another Donald Trump nominee, in this case, the appointee to NATO. And there was unanimous consent. Booker, all the Democrats, none of them objected. It's literally in the congressional record. Without objection, it is so ordered and it moves forward. My point in bringing up this little anecdote is performative opposition is not adequate to the moment. Performance is important at some level. It's not nothing. It focuses attention, but that is not adequate. What needs to be demanded is a real opposition. That if what Donald Trump is doing is as bad as Cory Booker articulated, and I'm not picking on him only, but if it is as bad as what Cory Booker articulated, then the opposition needs to treat it as if it is as bad and act accordingly. Shut down the Senate, slow it down in a way that you actually have the power to do. In the way that we've seen Republicans in the last few decades, right? Like really actually play hardball. Is it enough to stop everything bad that Donald Trump is going to do? Almost certainly not. Is it necessary to do to try to stop some of the bad stuff? Absolutely. And my hope is that as more rank and file liberals, Democrats, progressives see what's going on, they will become much more demanding of their Democratic lawmakers, their Democratic representatives to actually do things. In other words, that the old excuses from the Democrats, which have essentially sedated and anesthetized lots and lots of liberals into saying, hey, they're just doing the best they can, that those old excuses should no longer work anymore. And that more and more kind of normie liberals, normie progressives, people who aren't necessarily paying attention to politics all the time, but who are nonetheless somewhat engaged, that they don't accept those excuses anymore, and they demand far more of their lawmakers in mounting a real opposition and using what power they have to put up that opposition.
Well, this has been a shock to the system this first 2 months. You'd think that this could motivate a kind of activism that we haven't seen. And there's certainly been an activism, David, wouldn't you say? I mean, even GOP activism. Many more people, for example, in the last election showed up in the general than had before on the GOP side. And they were first-time voters.
Look, that's why I'm somewhat optimistic here, in terms of, not because of lots of people coming out to vote for Donald Trump, but because I do think we are now finally in that moment where it's possible for the rank and file of the Democratic Party to really move the party into a real opposition mode. I mean, I will admit to you, I wrote a book back in the late 2000s called The Uprising, where I basically said, listen, this is going to go one way or the other. There's a lot of populist anger out there. It's going to go one way or the other. And it felt like this could be the moment. It was at the end of the Bush administration. Barack Obama was running for president. Is this the moment where the Democratic Party's rank and file gets angry enough at its party to demand real results? The financial crisis happens, so it's perfectly teed up for a kind of New Deal paradigm shift. And without going all the way into it, but, hope and change becomes more of the same, becomes banker bailouts, it becomes, weak financial regulation. And the Republicans seize on that discontent with that to create the situation that we're now in. But I guess what I'm saying is that I felt like there was a chance for enough anger amongst Democrats at the Democratic Party to motivate the party into a real opposition stance would create a paradigm shift. It didn't happen. The hope is it will now happen. And I want to mention one last thing. We have seen this happen in the past. I mean, the New Deal era, the 1930s, 1940s, the 1960s, where there was enough foment inside of the Democratic Party to force the party to deliver and to put up a real opposition to conservative authoritarianism and fascism. So we've been here before. I think we're in this year in my lifetime where it should have happened in 2008, didn't really happen. Hopefully there's another chance. It's probably a more difficult situation because of what we've talked about, Donald Trump's thumb on the scale when it comes to democracy. But hopefully this is the wake-up call.
Yeah. Boy, I'd love to see it. That'd be great. Great reporting always at the Lever. We'll continue to show you the love here, and we hope you'll join us again soon. Thanks,
Thank
David
you.
Sirota.
Anytime. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
All the best, my friend. David Sirota. Good stuff. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.